Today I'm going to strangle that rooster. Today I'm going to show you how I built my garden using the Mittleider Gardening Course book. This video has quite a lot of information in it, so if there's anything in particular that you would prefer to see information on, just go ahead and skip ahead. Now that we're done planning our garden, it's time to get it all set up. And the first step for that is just to kind of figure out exactly where our footprint's going to be. Now, I figured it out on paper, but it's a little different sometimes when you're actually out in your space. What I've done is I've attached some twine to some stakes and marked every 5 feet on it. And I'm going to drop those at the 4 corners of what's going to be my garden. Now, the ideal for your garden is to give it a 5-foot barrier around all the outside edges. Now for me, the greenhouse is on one of those outside edges and I've got some pasture on another one, and so I might have a little bit of wiggle room there, but that's kind of the ideal. Now that we have our lines all strung, we need to get all of the sod, all of the grass out from in that area. Because Mittleider does recommend that you have a wider buffer from your rows to any vegetation, then it does mean that we're going to need to cut into our grass more than it was before. But I think it'll be a good thing, so we'll just have to see. After spending a full day taking the sod out of the garden and not being even halfway done, we decided it was time to call in some reinforcements. So we called a friend of ours who has a big tractor, and we were able to get permission for just a tank of gas, which is super great, to use it to take the rest of our sod out and to level the garden, which we had already leveled one of our smaller gardens that's right next to the greenhouse, and it took a number of hours. So to do this even larger garden that was about 4 times the size, we knew that it would be multiple days worth of work. So to be able to do it with this tractor, such a better deal. If you don't have a tractor, you can do it by hand, but it is going to be quite a bit of work. Now that our area is all clear and somewhat level, we put up some string. I like to use the nylon twine because it works well, and then just a 1 by 2 inch stakes at the ends. And what we do is we actually just do 3 sides because we figure where it ends is fine, but you can do 4 sides with the string. But it's really nice because it keeps you relatively straight as you're going along. After we have our guide strings up, we connect our 2 by 8 by 4 foot board to our 2 by 8 by 10 foot sides. And then we just continue down on the sides. Now, generally speaking, Mittleider, he recommends that you do a 30-foot row. For us, we're going 48 just because we have a longer garden. So there's a number of splice boards. The splice boards you just do 1 foot long and put in 3 screws at the end of each of them, and then 2 screws kind of in the middle, like just off from where the ends of the boards are that are splicing together. We actually pre-did all of those little screws to make it a little bit easier. And you just have one of those at each of the junctions. And then at the very end, we add the end board again. Now, it sounds really simple, and it wouldn't be that bad if you were exactly level on the whole thing. But for us, there's a little bit of measuring back and forth. We have to measure between the 2, make sure that those are level. We have to measure down along it, and then make any adjustments as we go. Generally, we've found it's fine to put on 3 segments before starting the leveling process, and just using boards to kind of get it at the right level, and then we're putting dirt in and lifting up the areas that need to be lifted up. And then we just double check to make sure that it's spot on with our guide wire and the distance from the raised bed next to it. There should be 3.5 feet. For us, we had to shrink it a little, so it is 3 feet, but Mittleider recommends 3.5 feet, and then that you have 5 feet off of the end of everyone, which again, we shrank up a little bit. We really wanted to get in that 1 extra row. We'll see if we regret that, depending on how much we end up fighting on those edges with the weeds. So it's probably a good idea to have that extra buffer space, but you know, we might have to play with it later. Once the box is in the exact right position, then we use 1 by 2 inch stakes that are 18 inches long, and you hammer those in right next to the wood, and then you screw them in. It's kind of super easy. You just need to make sure it's flush down so that it doesn't stick up over the top. When you're putting in your stakes, you want to put the first one 9 inches from the edge, and then you put the rest of them every 30 inches. Now, when I do it, I usually like to do my measurements from one box to the next box and make sure that I have my 3.5 foot aisleway, and then put in just a stake here and there, and then I go back and do the rest. We are getting our load of sand and sawdust today from our local landscape supply store. We bit the bullet and decided just to pay for it. Due to the quantity that we needed, we decided that this was the best way to go, even though it was a little bit more expensive. Previously, what we were doing is we were getting our sawdust and getting our sand, mixing it together in a cement mixer. So we'd do like 3 scoops of sawdust and then 1 scoop of sand. And that worked pretty well because it's supposed to be 25% sand and 75% sawdust. But it was a very, very slow process. It took us like 5 hours just to fill up one of the beds. So we are hoping that not only will this help us with the mixing, but decrease the time, just because we should just be able to go load up and dump it right into our beds. In order to prep the raised beds for filling, you need to measure out your pre-plant fertilizer. And it's going to be 1 ounce for every linear foot. Now, if you're doing the 18-inch beds, then you just do that amount for that. But if you're doing the 4-foot beds like I am, you actually want to treat those like 2 separate beds. And so I'll go ahead and do, for me, it's 3 pounds on the one side, and then I'll do 3 pounds on the other side. If you need to learn how to make the pre-plant fertilizer, go ahead and take a look at our other video. Then you take a rake and you really gently just kind of work it into the top level of that soil that's on the bottom of your bed. I'm starting to get excited because I know that I'm getting closer and closer to being done, and I have some things that I actually want to start planting in the garden. So this next step, it's time to fill it with the sawdust sand mixture. So again, that was 75% sawdust, 25% sand. You can go up to 50% of sand. And you don't want it to be a fine sand. You want it to be more of a coarse, like a cement or a construction sand. And you want to fill it up all the way to the top. As you go down filling your row, you want to try and get it as level as you can. So the first thing I do is I just try to get it in there approximately where I need it. And then I take my long level and I just use it as a screeding tool. And I go right across the top. I have one person on each side, and we get it perfectly level to the top of the box. Putting the T-frame together isn't really that hard. All you need is an 8-foot 4x4 board. Now, I went ahead and I put a little bit of extra weather protection down on the bottom 23 inches of it, because that's the portion that will be buried and in the raised bed. If you decide to do that, make sure that you use something that you're not going to have to worry about leaching into the soil. For the top cross piece, it depends on if you're doing the 18-inch beds or if you're doing the 4-foot beds. Now, for the 18-inch beds, you're going to want to have a 4-foot long cross piece. But for me, since we're doing the 4-foot beds, we have a 6-foot long cross piece. And then our diagonal supports are 2 feet long on the long edges, as opposed to if you're doing the smaller one, it would be like 10 3/4 inches, so quite a big difference there. The diagonal pieces are cut to a 45-degree angle on each end. To connect the cross piece at the top to the post, you use 2 galvanized 6-inch spikes, and they go in surprisingly easy. And then for putting on the diagonal pieces, you use 2 of the 3-inch decking screws on both the top and the bottom portion of it. Now that we've prepped all of our wood, it's time to dig our holes. We place these every 10 feet except for the last one. Since ours is 48 feet long, we go ahead and place that one at the 8-foot mark. If you're just doing the 30-foot beds like they would, then it would be a little bit easier. You would just do the 4 and they'd be 10 feet apart. I created a spacer board that was 23 inches long so that I could drop that in the hole because those posts are huge. So to try to put those up in the hole every time just to check and see if you're at your depth yet, it's kind of difficult. With this 23-inch spacer board, all you do is you dig your hole, you drop the spacer board in, and you want it to end at the top of the beds because you're actually only digging about 15 inches into the ground, and then the other 8 inches is where the bed is, and that you'll go ahead and fill in later. Make sure that these are centered well. Our beds are 4 feet wide, so it needs to be right at the 24-inch on center mark. It's better to have it a little bit deeper than a little bit short because a little bit deeper, it's pretty easy to add your dirt to it as you go, but if you need to dig deeper down, then you're gonna have to pull it back out again and bring out your post hole digger. For setting this first T-post, all you have to do is make sure that it's centered on the back board, and we actually like to connect it to the box just to give it a little bit of extra stability. We have really sandy soil around our house, so it makes it so that it's a little bit more movable. Might be different for you. You might not need to do that, but for us, it works pretty well. So we just use a level, make sure that it's nice and straight, and have our 23-inch line right at the top of the box. For the second T-post, it gets a little bit wobbly as you're doing the micro adjustments before you actually have it set. And so what we like to do is actually stretch a board across the raised bed and clamp it to that T-post until we get it totally level and where we want it. We also take a board across the very top to make sure that it's level, and be careful as you do this, because when you're checking levelness and moving things, sometimes it can fall down. We've had that occur a couple of times. Now that the T-posts are set, it's just a matter of putting up our sideboard. On the first T-post, we'll put 4 screws in, and then the second one, we'll go halfway through that 4x4 and only put 2 screws in. And then we'll put another supporting 6-foot board in the middle just to give it that added support. We check everything to make sure it's nice and level and do micro adjustments as needed. And then we just continue this process the entire way down the bed, and it's just a matter of adjusting and leveling and putting it together. And if you're not really careful about this leveling process, then it can look a little bit wonky because it'll have the little ups and downs and just not be a super straight line. And that straight, precise line is what makes it look so good. Now we're adding the cattle panel to make our bean trellises. It's more like a bean tunnel. Now this isn't strictly a Mittleider system with doing these kind of trellises. He has his all go up on the T-posts, which is great, but I don't know. I really love my little bean tunnel. It just feels so whimsical, and the kids like it a lot. It does make it a little bit wider for me because I was able to go from the center of one bed to the center of another, which is great because then that leaves room towards the front that I could maybe do like a bush bean, and then right at the base of it have my climbing bean go. I don't know, we'll see how it goes. This is something that I've just really enjoyed from my previous gardens, so I wanted to include it in this garden still. All you have to do for this is to drop down your posts. I like to make sure they're going into the actual ground that's below the level of the bed itself, so it's a little bit lower down, and then it makes it so they're not sticking up quite as much. And they need to be about 4 feet from one of them to the next. And be really careful as you're putting those cattle panel in, because they get pretty springy once you have them kind of compressed down, which is the whole reason that you need the post there anyways. And then it's just a matter of taking some wire and putting it around the fence as well as the post so that it doesn't go anywhere. When we put these panels up, there is a slight overlap to them, so you kind of have to wait to attach them until after you've gotten them all in there. So for this portion of our garden, it's for our corn and potatoes. We are doing our soil beds. And the soil beds are a little bit different, definitely less expensive to make, so it might be a good option for starting out. The first thing you need to do for it is level your area, which we have already done. And then the next thing you do is you get out your stakes and strings and go ahead and plot exactly where you want your garden beds to be. The garden beds are going to be 18 inches wide, and then, however long your garden is. The book recommends having 5 feet perimeter around the entire garden, and then 3.5 feet in between each row. We tend to shorten things up a little bit, and I don't know if we're going to end up regretting it, but we'll just have to see. The way you form these beds is by taking about 2 inches off of all of the aisleways and just putting it right up where you want your rows to be. And then you make sure that you level that off really well. Now, if you're not going to plant anything into it, just leave it a leveled off kind of mound. And the top of that leveled off mound should be the 18 inches, not the bottom of it, because it'll slope a little bit into the aisle. Go ahead and take a look at my video for how to plant in soil beds. I'll be doing that just a little bit later if you want to see how to prepare it for that point. I ended up creating this little jig for marking our PVC pipes. We need to mark the pipes at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and then go right in between those at what you would consider like 1:30 if you're thinking about it on the hands of a clock, because those are along the lines that we're going to make our marks for drilling the holes for the sprinklers, because you want it to go straight down and then slightly off to the side. The little jig is kind of nice because it holds the pipe where it needs to be. It's a little bit hard to manage the pipe on your own, so if you have another person who can help out a little bit with that, that can be good. You want to keep the lines as straight as you can. Now that we have our 3 horizontal lines marked on our PVC pipes, all we need to do is mark, starting at 2 inches from the end, every 4 inches across those 3 lines. The best way to do that I've found is to line up the PVC pipes with their lines facing up right next to a measuring tape. Then, using a speed square, go ahead and mark the 2 inch from the end and then every 4 inches. It works pretty well. After you've got your lines drawn, then it's just a matter of drilling holes in that PVC pipe. Now the PVC pipe does 200 PSI, so it's not quite as heavy duty as the Schedule 40. You could get the Schedule 40 if you wanted it to last even longer, but that's not 100% necessary for our purposes. And it's a little bit less expensive to go with the 200 PSI. Use a number 57 drill bit, or in our case, it's a 3/64 drill bit to make your holes, and you want to make them at the junction of all of your horizontal and vertical lines. This will give you 90 holes in the entire PVC pipe, and you need to do that for all of the pipes for the garden. So it takes a little bit, but it's worth it in the long run. By far the best way to do the sprinklers is by having the lines inside the bed. Now, what we ended up doing is we tapped into our sprinkler line with a 1-inch pipe, and we dug a ditch and had that ditch go and connect all of our beds up to the sprinkler system. After coming from the sprinkler line with the 1-inch pipe, it transitions up to a 3/4 inch pipe that actually goes up to feed the beds. If you do that, make sure that you put it below the frost line. And then it goes up and we have it branch off to the 2 sides. What you want it to do is you want the sprinkler line itself to be 6 inches from the inside edge of the bed, so that it falls right in between your two rows of plants, so that they're both going to get it. We put an on-off valve on each of ours so that we can choose which ones get water at which times, and for our particular system, our water pressure is a little bit lower, and so we have to run probably 2 at a time. We could maybe do 3. Using our 3/4 inch pipe that we already pre-drilled with all of our sprinkler holes in it, we went ahead and used some attachments that were screw-on and some that were gluing on. We actually found that the water pressure was low enough that we didn't even have to glue the slip-on ones. We may decide to in the future, but for right now. Some of ours are glued already, but other ones we just decided to go ahead and leave it so that we can take it apart. You could do that with the screw-on connections as well. You have to check carefully to make sure that all of the holes are pointing the right direction. If you do decide to glue it, I would definitely check to make sure that they're aimed the right way before you glue it in and make it permanent. You'll want to elevate this with a little 2x4 block that's 5 inches long and then has 2 nails that are nailed into the top of it that keep it from moving too much. This is a really good idea. We tried doing it without the nails and it didn't work very well. For putting in our trellising wire, we need to put holes in our boards all the way across the top, both the T-posts and then the supporting bracers. To do that, first we marked it 2 feet in from the side, 1 3/4 inch down from the top, and then we drilled it out with an 11/32 drill bit. We tried a smaller one before and it was a lot harder to get the wire through. It seemed like to have a little bit of wiggle room was helpful. For the very end T-post, you need to do a slightly larger bit so that you have enough room for the end piece that will keep that wire from moving. It's kind of nice because as you put it in, you can tighten, 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 and it won't go back. It's a one-way kind of valve spring or something. I can't remember what it's called right now, but I'll have to look it up and put it below. We have 9-gauge wire for doing the trellising. They use this a lot for grapes as well as, you know, other things that need to be trellised like blackberries. It should work really well for our purposes. We need to unwrap it from the tight little spiral that it's in and then feed it through all of the holes. At the very end, we'll put it in the little stopping device so that it won't go back any. And then once we know exactly how long we need it, then we can go ahead and cut the beginning and put one of those little devices on the beginning as well. And then it's just a matter of tightening it up and getting it nice and straight and as tight as you possibly can. These little devices are so great because they really do increase the ability to do that. And then you just kind of trim down the excess and wrap it up where it's nice and out of the way. We start by putting a nail in the end of the bed at about 6 inches in from the side. This is what we'll connect the wire to, and then we'll bend it over so that it holds it. And then we drop a piece of 18-inch rebar at every junction point, so about every 10 feet. And this, we go ahead and wind our wire around a couple of times. You wanna have it probably about 2 inches or so above the ground. And we continue it all the way down to the very end of our bed where we have another nail attached that we will go ahead and wind it around and then bend that over. And this will supply us with the location we need for attaching our twine, which is what our plants will climb up. We'll go ahead and show that to you with the tomatoes, but we wanted to show you this portion on the cucumber bed because it's a little easier to see with the smaller plants. Once you have the T-post with the wires set up, both at the top and one at the bottom to attach your twine to, all you need to do is cut 10 feet of twine, attach it to the bottom wire, and then you want to gently wrap it around your plant. In this case, it would be a tomato plant. Then you bring it up and around the middle wire or the sideboard. You want to kind of alternate between the two. It gives them a little bit more light and room. Then you bring it back down and create a slip knot. And the reason for this is as your plant is growing, it's going to take up more and more space and you'll have to continue to wrap your twine around it. So you have to be able to loosen up your twine so you can wrap the twine around the plant. You never want to try to wrap the plant around the twine or odds are it'll break. I'm Marie with wisdompreserve.life and thanks for gardening with me.